Good morning, everyone. Sorry, a little behind this morning. Yesterday went to an adoption thing for dogs. We foster dogs, and traded one for another. The dog we had was adopted, and so I have a new one, and he's having a little fun already this morning. And now I got to sneeze. All wonderful things. But good morning, happy Sunday. So I wanted to do I started off a new project right here. I'm going the wrong way over here, pointing the wrong way. That way. Okay. Anyway, new project. Thought maybe this might invigorate me back into, doing things. Let me see if I can slide my camera sideways a little here so I can keep that in there. Anyway, so what I'm doing, 1983 payoff pitch. I'm back into the mothership, if you will. After talking on yesterday's show, I was talking about how payoff pitch was the engine that kept me going. That just kept me through that 86 season. So I had like, freaking dog. No. Yeah, eating the corners. Anyway, I don't know how long this is going to last today. Sorry. But anyway, I got the 86. I'm sorry. I had that 86 season that I finished. Good morning, Dave. So I figured I had all these other sets sitting in my closet that were still in the wrap, the old block from payoff pitch. And I thought, well, let's try 1983. Fun season. So any of the seasons in the 80s are fun to me. And then I was thinking, well, how am I gonna work through this one? What am I gonna do that's maybe a little different to keep me into it? And I started thinking, what about I'm no Mel Allen here, but what about This Week in Baseball? Every Sunday morning, talk about the 83 replay and what happened the week before. So that's the plan. We'll see how the plans go. So this is kind of my kickoff show for it. And what I thought I would do was, excuse me. There we go. There goes that sneeze. What I thought I'd do is just kind of do a around the league preview, partly for myself and partly for anybody who's going to follow this 83 project. What was it like going into 1983? What were the thoughts? And then also kind of tying into the whole middle. How do we get through the middle? Well, here's how this is how I create storylines for myself. And these, of course, are what I like to call working animals. They are changing all the time, based on, as Uncle Ron tells us, once the dice hit, your tabletop, or in this case, the fast action cards hit the you flip one over. It is all fictional. So where does the story take me? So that will change the storylines. But what do I start with? So let's just walk through the teams. Let's start in the American League East. Let's talk about those Baltimore Orioles going into the season. My April hot take on them. This team going into 1983 felt like they were the team that were potentially becoming the team of the American League. They have a couple of great stars that, of course, I'll be watching to see how they do, and see how they start the season, especially. Those two guys are Cal Ripken Jr., who was heading into his second year, I believe, our first full year season, and Eddie Murray. Of course, Eddie Murray is the anchor of that team, and let's see how Murray goes. So the question for April for them is, what kind of start do they get off? Are they as good as I think they might be, or as the press thought they were going into 83? And then I also want to look at, at the end of the month, will I still be watching this team? What will I still be watching on this team? The pitching is interesting. Jim Palmer's on his way out. Basically, he's not the anchor of the staff anymore. He's not even the opening day starter. That's going to be, not Storm Davis. He's out of the bullpen. The rotation, at least to start the season, was El Presidente, Dennis Martinez, Mike Flanagan, Scott McGregor. Palmer was on the opening day roster, but was not in the rotation, at least early on. This will be an interesting team to see how that rotation pans out. And then they just have a strong lineup. So we'll be keeping an eye on the Orioles. The Tigers, who, of course, in my 1986 replay, were 3 years before that, but they were strong throughout the whole season, and we ended up winning that division in 86. But in 83, this is a talented team on the uprise. And, because they have, to me, they have really some really budding stars, as we all know. Alan Trammell started to come into his own. They had that duo, Trammell and Whitaker. And of course, they had Lance Parrish behind the plate. So they had the power. They had the starting to get some leadership. So it'd be interesting to watch these guys, see where they go, and see, do they jump out early in April? And if not, are they a team that's going to, come on late? It'd be interesting to see what happens with the Tigers in that division. The Yankees, of course, they're the Yankees. Always high expectations. They expect to play in October. Let's see what happens in April. A couple of players I'll be watching there: Dave Winfield and Ron Guidry. Easy. April's easy to pre-April. It's easy to pick out the superstars, right? But what's really fun about doing replays for me is not Dave Winfield and Ron Guidry, but it's somebody else that's going to present themselves in April in the replay. But going into it, those are the guys I'll be taking a look at. And then Toronto, this is the expansion team from the 70s, late 70s, coming in and starting to present some stars now. One of my favorite pitchers, I'm not a Toronto fan, but just as a kid, was Dave Stieb. I think a lot of people like Dave Stieb, it seemed. Jesse Barfield is a big power hitter. So it'll be fun to watch these guys. It's young. They're young team. Do they put anything together in April in that strong AL East? The Brewers are up next, and of course, they're in the shadow of the 1982 season, where they lost to St. Louis in the World Series. Excuse me for my cold here. Still haven't got past this thing. So how are they going to be in 1983? It'll be interesting here. Of course, they have two superstars, and Robin Yount and Paul Molitor, that I'll be keeping an eye on. So April will be interesting for Milwaukee. I think Baltimore's the team here. And as we know, Baltimore won the division eventually in 83. But I think the Brewers, have all the talent from 82. Let's see what they do in the 83 replay. The Boston Red Sox, they're in a transition phase. They have those stars, those names, Jim Rice, Dwight Evans. But this team, will tell us right away in April if they're reloading or not, or are they kind of treading some water here? What's going on with them? It's well documented how they did my 86 replay. So do they surprise here in April? I mean, any of these teams can obviously surprise. Then on to my lowly Cleveland Indians, but they did well in my 86 replay. We'll see how they do here in 83. I don't think there's much talent here to compete at all. Growing up as a kid was Andre Thornton. Many kids from Cleveland, that was their favorite player. So they have him, and of course Rick Sutcliffe, who went on to have a really decent career, but not for the Indians. Of course, us kids who grew up in Cleveland know that we were the AAA for the major leagues, and so what we would do is show some talent to teams, and then Boston and LA and the Yankees would go and steal them, which is no kind of different than today. But anyway, we'll see what happens with them. I have a feeling that I'll just end up with some stories at the end of April that I'll start to follow going into May on individual players on that team. Nobody knocks themselves out in April unless they absolutely have a horrendous April. Really for me, how long do the Indians even stay, within 10 games of first place? It will really be the team story there. They surprised me in 86, so you never know, but this will be one where maybe Andre Thornton gets hot and shows that he's going to run for maybe the home run crown or something. I don't know, or just some other complete player shows up like they usually do. So that's kind of the AL East. Flipping over to the AL West, I'll be looking at the White Sox. This is a team that lives on kind of let's see how they do before the trade deadline, and they're generally on one side or the other. And so here, I never really got into this guy, but I know a lot of people love Harold Baines. I don't know. I never saw the excitement of Harold Baines, but I will be watching him. He's the centerpiece of that team. Ralph Garr is another one, old time veteran. I used to love him on the Braves. So will he, with his veteran presence there, help the White Sox toward a division title? There is a lot of good teams. Well, there are some really strong teams in the AL West. So we'll see how the White Sox do. So the Royals next. The Royals are always in the 80s in it, and that's that's definitely because of George Brett. Got a great closer, Dan Quisenberry, who had 45 saves that season. This will be a team where does that starting rotation hold up? So they'll be fun to watch as well. Kansas City always does well in my replays, especially in the 80s. The Rangers, there's talent on this team as I look through it and look through the season for them. And good morning to Time Machine. How are you? Happy Sunday. So the Rangers, a couple of people I'll be watching throughout April. It will be Buddy Bell, former Indian. Took off, was in the 70s with the Indians, off to the Rangers in the 80s. He's a reliable guy, hits for power, third base, everyone knows. And then kind of a wild card on this is Charlie Huff. Charlie with his knuckleball, how's he going to do in 1983? So this is a team that, does it gain any consistency? Does it get out to a hot start? It'd be interesting to watch the Rangers here in April. The next team is the Oakland A's. They are at an identity crossroad, I believe. They've got a lot of youth, as we know, because we can sit here with 2020 and look at what the A's turned into from the amazing 70s teams they had with my favorite pitcher of all time, Raleigh Fingers. But this is a team that's now changed into, as we know, getting into the 80s with that the pitching staff, where basically the manager fell asleep during the time the teams were out on the field. He let those starters go, and they actually did well. Rick Langford and Steve McCaddy, remember all those guys eventually. So, but what is the 1983 A's? This is an electorate. Ricky Henderson, who of course is going to be watching him where he goes on the stolen base crown, and then some power with Tony Armas. The question will be here. They will not be a dull team. I got a note here from Sportsman. When you set your videos for kids, you can't hit the bell for notifications, just to let you know. Oh, thank you. I didn't set my videos for kids. In fact, I had that they weren't for kids. So let me go back and check that setting. I know exactly where it is. I appreciate you letting me know that. But I literally did not set it for kids. So I'm not sure what happened there. But I will double check that. Thank you for letting me know. But back to the A's, that will all be, does Henderson and Armas get any help in the lineup? And then how does that pitching hold up for Oakland? In California, they had a disappointing 1982 season. So April is going to be about how they start. Is this just going to be the 82 team, or we're looking at something different? Of course, multi-talented players on this team, especially in the offensive end with Reggie Jackson and Fred Lynn. And my big MVP for 1986 is on this team, Doug DeCenze. So California is filled with veteran talent throughout the 80s. 83 is no different. So this will be a veteran team, see how they come out. And again, I think they have the veteran offensive power. Do they have the pitching? Minnesota Twins, young team. So, that baggy out. And as a kid, I used to look at that thing and go, why did they build a stadium with that? That is so ugly. I just thought the baggy was, I don't know. It's just like you were covering something up. I hated that thing in the Metrodome, but I hated domes. Anyway, looking at this team, they're young. You never know. Is this team closer to becoming what we know they ended up becoming later in the 80s? Of course, they have Ken Herbeck and Gary Gaglietti. So they got strong cornerstones, literally, at first and third. So again, it's pitching, isn't it always? Out in Seattle, they're waiting on Ken Griffey. So Ken Griffey Jr. But there is some players on here that will show themselves, I hope. I pointed out the Al Cowens, Floyd Bannister. There's some interesting pitching on this team. I don't think they have the offense to really compete in this division, but you never know. Flip it over to the National League, taking a look at those Philadelphia Phillies. This is basically what I'm calling the last stand. I think, reporters would have called it the last stand. Pete Rose, Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton, all these guys are nearing the end. Can they do something here? They have to do something here because it's really, it's starting to, the light's fading on this team. And because of all these superstars that are basically on the end of their careers. So my dog calmed down. Yippee. All right, so let's take a look at the next team. But I do expect the Phillies to contend. I really do. The Pirates are next, and can't talk about that today, right? Although actually, I'm not going to go off on a tangent. I think the Pirates are going to be better this year in real life. But in this one, this is a team that's also kind of quietly transitioning here in the 80s. Their big days of We Are Family are long gone, way back in the mirror. But there's some fun players to watch on this team from the 80s. Willie Stargell's at the end of his career, but he's still there and he still has the pop. And of course, we all know Dave Parker, is not only a great hitter, but a great defensive right fielder. So this is a team, if it makes noise in April, could potentially make noise in September and October. But I think they're going to have to get off to a good start, to stick around with teams like Philadelphia and St. Louis and this next team, who I really like, Montreal. This is a team that had expectations going into 1983. Some really good players. They have talent everywhere. It's just going to be, I actually got to go up and see some of this. I was stationed in Plattsburgh, New York, in the late 80s, early 90s. It started to fade by then, but, and again, another dome stadium that was, there never has anybody said, oh man, I can't wait to see a dome stadium pop up again. There's a reason they don't. They're horrible. The retractables are great, fantastic, especially in the northern or rainy season type places. And they should do one in Tampa. Now I'm getting off on a freaking tangent on retractable domes. Let's talk about that. Back to the Expos. So we got two huge players to follow, Andre Dawson and one of my favorite catchers growing up. Johnny Bench was my favorite catcher growing up. Just about every kid in my area, his favorite catcher growing up. But Gary Carter started to really come into his own prior to becoming a World Series champion in New York. He was a great player out in Montreal. So fun to watch him. This will be a team. Does it change the potential? Does it show up in payoff pitch as victories? Next up is the defending champs, the St. Louis Cardinals. Speed. Did I mention speed? Speed. This will be a team. Does that speed and does that defense of this team translate into wins in payoff pitch? So this is, the cornerstone of this team is Ozzie Smith. It's a great discussion on C&D, actually a great topic one day. How do you get leadership and defense and speed? I mean, I know you can do stolen bases and a better runner can go, can advance more, but does it really translate the fear that puts into teams, the fear it puts into pitchers that they have some of these runners on that they do? How do you make that show up in C&D? So, so let's see what happens here. Ozzie Smith and of course Willie McGee, who really, I believe that was this World Series, that it was like a coming out party for Willie McGee in that World Series. So St. Louis will, be a team of does the talent style that they have. I hope I'm making sense here. Does it translate to C&D? What a great topic that would be to talk about with a developer, to how, because everything is, with especially baseball, it's X's and O's, right? X's and O's is football, but you know what I'm talking about. It's all, what's his batting average? What's his OPS? Blah, 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 blah. What's his ERA? What's his whip? As anybody who knows, who watches baseball, that doesn't win games. What wins games is the talent on the field. And sometimes veteran leadership matters. And sometimes that threat of speed changes how the pitcher pitches. How do you get that to work in C&D? I don't know that you can, but I think it's an interesting topic. And off I went on yet another tangent. Got another little chat here. TMN94 says, finally caught a live stream. Just want to say I've enjoyed every show you put out. Keep doing what you're doing. Great. Those kind of comments just make my Sunday. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I love doing this stuff. So thank you. That really means a lot. The Mets. Let's talk about the Mets. This was a weird thing for me. Growing up as a kid, again, growing up in Cleveland, we had baseball. But we didn't have talent to baseball. We were about to be on the verge of having some great teams starting. I never forget the Sports Illustrated article that had us potentially winning it all. Of course, that was a joke. We didn't even, I think we finished like fourth that season, like we always did. But there was talent on that team enough to at least get some national headlines. But so for us growing up as kids, all my buddies, everybody, look, we like the Indians. You don't have a choice. They're there. They're the team you can go see. You don't have the Major League Baseball ticket to watch anybody you want. So we saw the national teams. We saw the New York teams. We saw Boston. The cable had just kind of really started out. So you're starting to see the Cubs and the Braves. And of course, we saw the Dodgers. And then for a lot of people in Cleveland, the Reds were, because the AM radio station would, you could actually get it all the way up in Cleveland, 3.5 hours away. And Marty Brennaman and Joe Nuxhall were my absolute nights, evenings, days, whenever they were on. Never missed a show. Well, I shouldn't say I never missed a show, but I mean, if it was on, I had a radio in my hand, I was listening to those guys. No better in my lifetime for me, and that includes the incredible Vin Scully / Ron Juckett, is Marty Brennaman. He's just the best ever for me. So I went on yet another tangent, but my point is that all of us used to pick out favorite teams, and a lot of us stayed with them. One of my good friends is a huge Dodger fan, and people go, "Oh, you're say to him, oh, you're a bandwagoner, blah, blah, blah." Yeah, you have to understand, growing up as a kid, we didn't have a lot of choices. And how long are you going to follow a lovable loser? I mean, we kind of understood as kids that team's going nowhere, never is. So we had a choice to make. And so, again, as kids, we all went out and kind of grabbed onto our own teams. And those are the teams we were presented on television. And if you remember, the Braves weren't very good still. So what are we going to do? Switch one lovable loser for another? The Cubs weren't really any good. They had some good players, and yes, they rose up a couple of times. And some people did pick the Cubs. I should really kind of say that. Some people did pick the Cubs. I didn't like Harry Carey. I didn't like him. It just, his voice irritated me. It was like nails on a wall. I know he's one of the great all-time announcers. But he just seemed like a drunk old uncle to me. So I could not get into Harry Carey. I loved his son, Skip Carey. I thought was great on TBS, but I don't know. Harry just rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know Tangent. Anyway, so I didn't. That was my reason for not picking the Cubs. My team became the New York Mets as a kid, especially as a teenager. Really started to get into the Mets and watched them all the way through that wonderful World Series where they beat the Red Sox. Sorry, my Red Sox fans. But I followed that all the way through. I'd just gotten into the military that year. Kind of why I replayed the 1986 season. That was not kind of. That is why I replayed the 1986 season. Of course, the Mets lost after taking a 3-zip lead in my 86 replay against the Astros. The Astros came back and won 4 freaking straight. And then they went to the World Series and lost to the Angels. So how do these New York Mets do in 1983? This is a team that is interesting because here comes that young talent coming up, Darryl Strawberry. But they've added, they have some veteran leadership from my other favorite team, the Cincinnati Reds, George Foster. So this team is starting to make some noise and start to make their way toward that 86 season. So let's see how they do in 83. They're going to be fun to watch. But I'm not sure, not to say I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure that, that the roster's just not there yet. So let's jump into the chat real quick here. George Hendrick, last good year, not enough pitching, Sutter off year, competitive best. Talking about St. Louis. And where did George Hendrick come from? Oh yeah, that's right, the Cleveland Indians. Yep, we gave him, we sprinkled some sauce on him, got him all ready for all the other teams, and then they stole him. Yeah, but Sutter, my gosh, man, when Sutter was on, he is probably the second best reliever ever in my mind. And I'm not talking about Mariano Rivera. That could be yet another show. Being the best ever. Rollie Fingers was the best ever. He played in an era where he would do 3-4 innings. He would come in the second or third inning at time. Tell me at the time that Mariano Rivera came in the second inning. Never. They're just a different kind of. It's almost unfair to really, compare them. But if I'm going to, yes, I'm biased, I take Rollie Fingers every day, all the time. The reason he won an MVP as a relief pitcher, guy was amazing. But anyway, Suter, amazing. Oh man, that cutter. Yeah, he created the cutter. For those of you who don't know, or you think somebody in the 2000s created the cutter? No, Sutter mastered it. Maybe I shouldn't say created it. He mastered that, and he was a monster for St. Louis and the Cubs, and even the Braves. But as Chris is saying here, crisis. I saw that real quick and just said it. Midlife crisis here is saying that Sutter just had that off year. Yeah. So for St. Louis, they are the defending champions, but you never know. Again, I just think the problem with that team is going to be you can't put that into cards and dice, because I just think they were an intimidating team, and you can't. How do you put that into cards and dice? So also he grew up in Florida. Okay. Loved Johnny Bench, became a huge Reds fan. Yeah. I mean, where did they play? They played their spring training down there. And I know the Indians and the Reds both played down there. And at the town, oh man, I lived in Florida for 12, 13 years. I can't believe I can't think of the name of the damn town they played in. But yeah, they were down there, and man, I love the Reds. There's so much about I could have a whole show on the Reds. All right, let's go to the NL West, which the Reds are a part of. But let's start out with those Los Angeles Dodgers. Okay, this is a team that did not do well this season, I don't believe, if I remember correctly. But it was a team that hit the reset button and immediately started stocking some talent, though. But they were also on the way of some of that 1970s talent was going out the door, like a Steve Garvey, Ron Cey, those cornerstone Davey Lopes, Bill Russell, Steve Yeager behind the plate, all those Dusty Baker. I could go on all day, but that talent was has either gone, retired, or aged and is about to go out the door. But they have a young bidding star in the name of Fernando Valenzuela. And so it'll be interesting to see how Fernando does here in this 83 replay. I'm not they'll right away show if this is a team that's just, going to once in a while jump up and sometimes not. I think they're going to go through streaks. I really do. Okay, next up, the Atlanta Braves, and they did actually have a decent season, if I remember correctly. When I looked at Baseball Reference, I believe they finished second. And if you watch TBS, how did you not like the cornerstone players of Dale Murphy and Bob Horner? I mean, they were so much fun to watch as a kid. But the problem with them was always what else? Murphy and Horner could definitely carry them for weeks, but they needed, pitching to really, and some other players to compete in anything. They had their two superstars, but could they put enough around them? Obviously, they put enough around them, I believe, to finish second that year. We'll see how they do. The Astros. This is a team, again, we all know what they ended up doing by 86. But they've got another team that has a really good set of talent. When your starting rotation includes Nolan Ryan, they're going to be good. Jose Cruz is a veteran presence in that lineup. Always was good throughout the late 70s, and he's in probably the end of his prime of his career. But they've got they never were a power hitting team. In the 70s and early 80s until they got Bagwell and all those guys. But, this team was speed, much like the Cardinals, built much like the Cardinals, with good bullpen, Dave Smith, Joe Sambito. Those guys, were starting to come along. They got Sambito. They didn't have Sambito this year, I don't believe. They ended up getting him from the Red Sox in that Bagwell deal. I believe it was in the Bagwell deal. Anyway, they should be an interesting team to watch. I'm expecting they will be, another team like the Cardinals that speed will matter, but does all that translate onto the tabletop? In San Diego, a team that I always felt was cousin to Cleveland, a team out west that never won, just could never win. They did. We all know they did. They ended up playing the Tigers in the World Series, but they just, for a long time, they were the National League's AAA team, and people pulled from them. So going into 83, they have a Hall of Famer, and Tony Gwynn. It's early for him, but he's already going to make himself known. I expect him to make himself known. And then they had Rupert Jones, a good budding star as well. So this is one of those teams that watch in April, because if they were to get out to a hot start, it'd be fun to watch. They could be a team that could be a surprise contender. But if they get off to a crappy start, it could be, they're just the Padres. Up next is a veteran-heavy team. And I think very unpredictable going into 83, and that's the San Francisco Giants. They have a power hitter right in the middle of that lineup, and Jack Clark, which, he was an RBI machine. I would just remember that as a kid. Man, Jack Clark, it seemed like Jack Clark was always in the RBI leads or up there. But he also, if I remember correctly, was very two things about him that, if you want to pull negatives, was he was injury prone and he was a defensive liability. But when he's hot, which is another thing that doesn't really come through on tabletop, I know that History Maker Baseball uses the cold and hot kind of features and tries to use that a little bit. But normally in tabletop, you can go 4 for 4 yesterday, 0 for 4 the next day, which, by the way, can really, happens quite often in real baseball. So, but the point being is this guy can carry a team. And so I think Giants are another important team to get off to a hot start. And then they have another one of the best pitchers of all time in Vida Blue. He's way past his peak, of course, at this point, but he's Vida Blue. And he can also kind of carry a team for a month, meaning if he puts in, 4 or 5 great starts in a month together and they win those games, that could turn that into a contending team. Next up, last up, I should say, and unfortunately last up is my other team, the Reds. And sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze any second. This is a team in transition. The superstars are going out the door. I just mentioned Foster's out in the Mets uniform, and most of that team is starting to fade, and it's really sad because they were so awesome in the 70s. But I highly do not expect this team to make a run at any point. I just expect them to be in the basement, and the Reds are, it's a franchise that's kind of reloading, redefining, if you will. And Johnny Bench is still there. So as long as he's got a card, I'm going to be watching him. Dave Concepcion is a guy who I think, when you look at all those Reds teams, if there's one guy who didn't get his flowers, as they say, it's got to be Dave Concepcion. He was known as this, more than adequate, good defensive shortstop, kind of a decent hitter. But the reality is Dave was the cornerstone of that team. As far as like just dependability, always there, always played. I have to look this up, but I bet he played almost 90 to 95% of the games. He just didn't seem like he was ever hurt. Always seemed to hit between 280 and 320. Always, he wasn't going to hit you 30 home runs or 20 home runs, but he always seemed to be, again, how does this come through and tabletop, a clutch hitter. You didn't see Sparky Anderson running out and pinch hitting for Dave Concepcion. And in that era of baseball, shortstops and second basemen were the weak spot. And Dave was never a weak spot, even though he might have hit eighth. Pitchers always hit ninth. And so, but Dave hit eighth because of that plethora of talent they had on the Reds. And he might have hit, at times higher than that, and even got him, maybe second or third. But, he was, when you go through that team, it was him and Cesar Geronimo who were the defensive studs up the middle. And they had Joe Morgan over at second, who I believe is on Philadelphia in 1983. Pete Rose it was just, and George Foster out and left, and Ken Griffey Sr. out and right or left or wherever they moved him. Usually he's in the right when Foster was in left. And of course, bench behind the plate. This was a fantastic team. Dan Dreesen starting to come through on this team. So I just love Davey and just always thought he didn't get enough credit. So on this team now, I think he's more of a focus to watch. They're not so good. And Davey carry them at any point and have a decent month. So, so in 1983, what am I expecting? I honestly don't know. I'm really excited about jumping in this. I think that it's kind of open all over the place. I don't know if I know the Cardinals won it all, but just as, we go back here to one of the comments was, about Bruce Sutter not having a good year. The Cardinals, and again, does all that translate to tabletop? I think it leaves it open. And the Brewers, they didn't have that second season that everyone was in Milwaukee, I'm sure, was hoping for. So who's going to be those teams that are going to jump out? Baltimore, Kansas City, Philadelphia? I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. So anyway, just wanted to have a quick This Week in Baseball, a preview show of the 83 season. And I'll be trying to do one every Sunday. I'll recap the 1983 games that I had played up to that point. Kind of go through who's starting to show themselves, who's struggling. I don't know that I'll do every team, but I will, take a look at things and just kind of give you a recap. So you stay up with the replay. Thanks for jumping in, and I will talk to you all later.